Okay, there's kind of a lot to discuss about smog. Um, this will definitely be a bigger video, I think. Um, so, first, the name, smoky fog. Um, and so you can see that it's a mix of smoke and water vapor. Um, you need usually some sort of small water droplets or really high concentration of water vapor. Um, and so if you don't have smog or you don't have the water vapor, you don't get smog. It only forms in certain places, only forms when the sun is out. And even then, um, you kind of need like specific atmospheric conditions for this chemistry to happen. Um, I lived in Los Angeles during the 1980s, back when smog was a really big problem there. Like in Los Angeles, almost everywhere in the United States, smog is very well controlled now. There's very limited smog in the US now, but I came to the United States in the mid 1980s. And I remember watching the smog build. It would be on the radio in the morning. They'd say the conditions are ripe. We expect smog layer to set in by 10 in the morning, and we expect the smog to break up tonight by 7 p.m. or whatever. Um, Smog layer is temporal. Like I don't know how to say this in lingo, but it's like a time of the day if the circumstances are right, just for a while. And so in Los Angeles, when I was a kid, everybody would go jogging very first thing in the morning or right after dark. Um, During the middle of the day, like when kids go to school, they would like schedule PE in the morning so that you wouldn't be outside during the smoggy part. Um, um, you could see it happening. So, like in some parts of Los Angeles, if you're at the right elevation, you can watch the layer start to get brown. And then, if you're in the right place at the right time, usually when the shadows start to get long, all of a sudden you'll just see it go and it like drains and disappears. So, you could have the most beautiful nights around Los Angeles, and when you wake up in the morning it would be all beautiful and crisp and clear and blue, but in the middle of the day it would get really horrible. In a lot of cities where there's a lot of public transit, or where people ride a lot of bikes, or when people do a lot of like commuting in crappy buses or stuff, the business hours of the day are the most hazardous. Because not all smoke is the same, not all smog is the same. Some places have both types of smoke, so they have both types of smog, but this is secondary chemistry and they're different chemistry. So there's one type of smog and a different type of smog. It really sucks for those places that have both types. And this is secondary chemistry. And so you can't really control smog, you control the ingredients. So like when you do a smog check on your vehicle, which you may not know, it's a thing you have to do every few years to re-register your car in our state. When you do a smog check, they're just making sure that your car doesn't give off the ingredients to make smog. We regulate the primary pollutants that become smog. Um, Smog was sort of a thing that people knew about, but it didn't really have a name. It wasn't a thing until this one really famous event. Whoa. Until this one really famous event. It was called the Great Smog of 1952, and it happened in London. You might know that London Industrial Revolution, the heart of coal and steel. Our modern industrial age was essentially invented just outside of London. And you might know that London is really foggy. It's so foggy that there's a brand of jackets named London Fog. Remember Jack the Ripper would hide in the fog? People who live in the really low elevation near the coast part of London are called pea soupers because they're exposed to fog that is as thick as pea soup. So there was like this few days stretch, it was 5 days, when the conditions were perfect. Like the fog set in and it was super thick. And it was right after World War II when London was rebuilding and relaunching industry. And so they just had this perfect combo of like extremely thick smog, extremely heavy factory activity using a lot of coal, and like a perfect light wind that kept all of that smoke headed right for London, which had all the fog. And it just got really smoggy in a few days, somewhere around, like originally they attributed 4,000 deaths to this event. That's really bad in just a few days. But now with current analysis, we believe that somewhere around 6,000 people died because of the smog. And literally, like, people would drop dead on the way to work. They would get home and have like coughing attacks and then have a heart attack or like collapse a lung and die in their homes. It was horrible. Like, you know, 4 to 6,000 in London of 1952 is a really big number. That would be like 4 to 6,000 people dying here in Santa Barbara or something. Like, London was a big city, but in 1952 it wasn't that big. And it was bigger than Santa Barbara. But and there was like all this acute illness where a bunch of people got sick and then stayed sick for a long time afterward, starting right during this event. And people were like, oh, maybe we should start to look out for these conditions. So smog became a thing to be avoided here. By the way, it wasn't really controlled in most parts of the world until much later. In the United States, we just got into this late 70s, early 80s. There's two types of smog, and you have to know them. There's the sulfurous smog, which comes from coal, and I really want you to like make this connection forever. Sulfur, coal, and sulfur. Sulfurous smog is the kind I was just talking about in London. It's called the London type of smog, and it looks gray. And the chemistry here, the secondary reaction, is the formation of sulfuric acid, just like in acid rain. So you need the smoke and the water, plus it has to be in the daytime so you can get the energy to break some bonds, start the chemistry happening. And so you'll see in this whiteboard, on the screen here, sulfur oxides, water, and sunlight cause sulfuric acid to form. Of course, SOx are often found in particulates and fine coal ash, little parts of coal that aren't burning. And so when you breathe that in, that can happen in your lungs. Or you can just get an acid fog. That's really, really dangerous because that increases contact time. You'll get like sulfuric acid, little water droplets, fog droplets, and that gets into your lungs and that basically goes direct to your blood. So the sulfurous smog is extremely dangerous acutely. Photochemical smog is the kind that we get in Los Angeles from vehicle emissions and fog. It's brown, so that's like that yellowish, light brown color that you're more likely to have seen. We call that the LA type, but it's actually common in a whole bunch of cities, and some of them are surprising, like Denver, which you would think of as extremely clean, happens to have that weird geography where Denver gets really bad smog. Mexico City, which is surrounded by like pristine, beautiful, clean Mexico. Um, at least in that area, Mexico's perfect. Like it's beautiful mountains all around it. But in Mexico City proper, you've got the right geography where smog forms there. And there will be like weird, surprising places where you would otherwise expect this to be not such a big deal. But you can get the brown type because there's cars and the right geography. Um, Photochemical smog, you unfortunately have to know this too, is NOx and VOCs. And so you can just go back to your criteria pollutants and write the types of smog there if you'd like. And these make oxidants, and we've discussed oxidants before in this class, ozone and peroxyacetyl nitrates, which I'm sorry, the College Board has used a couple times. And so we just refer to that as PAN or PANS. It's a category of chemicals. So these are all oxidants. Again, if you increase contact time in your lungs, that's a good thing to write down, increase contact time. With particulates, those oxidants can spend more time in your body because of the particulates, and so they're more likely to harm you. Oxidant damage tends to be like repeated exposures. So people who grow up in Los Angeles or who spend a lot of time outside during those parts of the day tend to have the more serious harm. It's less likely that you would notice if you were just there for one day. The sulfurous smog, one day exposure, you would feel it. The photochemical smog is more repeated exposures. And I don't understand what the chemistry is about that, sorry. So both of these are secondary. So both of these, we have to control the ingredients. And it's important to point out that some parts of the world have cars and coal. London doesn't actually have a whole bunch of people driving. It's a pretty packed city like New York. It's got a lot of cars, but they don't really move a whole lot. But Beijing and Shanghai, those are really spread out. They're like centers. So there's like cars coming in and going out all the time. And then they also have a lot of like factories and electricity production. So Beijing and Shanghai are a couple of famous cities for you to know because they have both the gray and the brown types of smog. So I keep talking about these special conditions, right? Like a place that will make smog. If you put all the right ingredients in Santa Barbara, we would never have smog here. We're just safe from smog. You need a really weird and rare circumstance. And this explanation can be tricky, but you do need to know some things. I'll show you some pictures after this. Remember that the thing that heats up the atmosphere is the Earth. So the hottest thing on the atmosphere is the ground. And any emissions that you make will be with hot air. So hot air rises, right? High pressure toward cold, low pressure. And so air pollution usually dissipates upward. If you've ever seen a factory from far away on a still day or a campfire when there isn't any wind, you'll just notice that what's coming off the hot ground just goes straight up. And the atmosphere gets bigger and thinner and bigger and thinner. So it's kind of a good coincidence that most cities, air pollution moves away from the people. And really, it's a big atmosphere. Spreading it out really lowers the impact on humans. But sometimes you'll get some weird geography where it's not hot to cold. There's weird geography where sometimes hot air can move in over cold air. And please try to look at my speaker view for a minute. Remember that heat is pressure, right? Heat is molecular activity, it's energy. So all those molecules are moving. And if they're hotter, they're moving faster. So like a mosh pit, heat is high pressure. And if you've got weird geography where cold air can tuck in below hot air, this is high pressure. And this is cold low pressure. that air pollution is going to get pushed back down toward the people. It'll be trapped. These are called inversion layers, atmospheric inversions, or temperature inversions. I'd like you to write that down before I change slides. And they're this weird circumstance where hot air moves in over cold air and traps air pollution. The normal source of atmospheric temperature is the ground, but some places like Los Angeles are surrounded by mountains, and then the sun rises first over a giant desert. But some places like Los Angeles also have access to the ocean. So Los Angeles gets this big hit of fog throughout the day, while the nearby desert is elevating hot air over the mountains. Los Angeles is perfect for making an inversion layer, so we should never have put a big crowded city there. Now we know. You probably should kind of make note. I doubt that you would have to explain why inversion layers happen, but you should know what they are. And I think that these are maybe some good visuals for you. Coastal areas where hot air from land moves over cold air squeezing in, or valleys where you can trap cold air in a bowl between a bunch of mountains, and then there's warm air around it. So the Central Valley, Denver, Mexico City are in valleys. Los Angeles, London, those are both in coastal areas. If you've trapped your air pollution under warm air, that air pollution is not going anywhere. And so you keep adding ingredients, and the chemical tipping points start to happen, and chemistry happens in the air, and we build nasty stuff. And you can see it. That's smog. Frustrating thing about smog is people know. Like, there's a lot of air pollution where you're exposed to it, but how would you know? And the crappy thing about smog is, like, everybody knows, like, you can just see it, like, oh crap, it's smoggy today. I thought these pictures were fake, and then I looked into it. I can't believe I'd never heard of this. There's this city in Uzbekistan, which is like really big and crowded. I've never even heard of it. It's in the foothills of the Himalaya. And so you would think some of the cleanest, most beautifulest air on the planet. But something funny happens, it's a valley, and the Himalaya are really tall, so they're really cold, and cold air sinks. And so as the high plains of the Uzbek plateau heat up, cold air slides underneath that hot air from the mountaintops and just builds one of the strongest inversion layers on the planet in this extremely industrialized, crowded city in a country that has pretty weak regulations. So one of the most consistently bad air qualities on the planet is this one city in Uzbekistan. And it's considered like an outrage because the air is in like unhealthy air quality, like 22 hours a day, like 320 days out of the year. Beijing and Shanghai are famous because they have both types of smog. By the way, Beijing also has really bad particulate air pollution. We'll talk about that in a minute. Beijing also has a bunch of smokers. So does Uzbekistan. But this place, I forget the name of the city, is famous because the air pollution is so consistently bad. Like, it's just always smoggy. Okay, I think I will stop talking about smog. Thank you.